Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone who's an Israeli public speaker and author of historical fiction, including the Adam Lapid books, of which the newest one is In That Sleep of Death, and which is out soon. Please help me welcome Jonathan Dunsky. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me.
Well,
nice to meet you.
Yeah, no, well, we have a lot to cover, but I always like to start off with everyone by asking about you, your background. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Israel in a small town on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and I lived there about until I was 20.
Which town?
It's called Mevaseret Zion.
Okay,
It used to be a very small place. Today it's about 30,000, I think, maybe even more than 30,000 people. So it's quite large in Israeli standards. It would have been a city if it wasn't that close to Jerusalem, I think. But then I moved.
I lived in Jerusalem as a kid. I lived in Gilo for a couple of years. So I'm sorry.
So I studied in Jerusalem in high school, and later I moved to Tel Aviv and moved around Israel for a while, and did my stint in the army, of course, and now I write books about early Israeli history.
Well, I'm going to definitely ask about the book. So what was your family life like, and it's in particular with regard to Judaism? Were you observant at all?
We would say the Kiddush on Friday evenings, and some of us would of course fast on Yom Kippur. I fast on Yom Kippur today. So we weren't observant. We weren't strict about religion. We were a secular family, but of course Judaism plays a big part in our lives because we live in Israel. So the Jewish presence is all around us in the holidays, in the language, in the things that we learn in school, in the history. So it's different. I believe, from the way Jews in the diaspora experience Judaism. You have to make more of an effort, I believe.
Yes, that's one of the things I love. I mentioned I was there as a kid. I went a few years ago. It was the first time that I had been back since being a kid, and I just love that aspect that you see Jewishness, you see it all around you. That you don't feel like the other. This is your place. This is your home. It's really such a warm feeling.
Yeah, it's a different feeling. I lived a few years in the Netherlands, and while it's a great country, it doesn't feel the same. Nothing that they did made me feel this way. It's just the atmosphere in general. You don't have to. It's just something that's there in the air and everything.
I saw that you lived in the Netherlands. I was going to ask about that. So what prompted you to move? When did you move there, and what prompted you to go there?
I moved there about 10 or 11 years ago, and what made me move there is a girl.
That's always the case. Yes.
Yeah, so she lived in the Netherlands. She studied there and she worked there, and we met. And then I moved there to be with her because I live a sort of more flexible lifestyle with my work in terms of I don't need to be in a certain geographical location. So I moved with her and later brought her back to Israel.
So it was wound up being worth it.
7 years, 8 years now. Since
very
we got back.
Mazel tov. So as a kid, did you read a lot? Were you very into books as a kid?
Yeah, I'm a bookworm to this day, but I was something extreme. My father says I was extreme. Now I have kids of my own, and I tell them, look at how much they read. And said, you were much worse or much better, depending on your point of view. And of course, when I started out, I read in Hebrew, and only later I started reading in English. And I have to say that I'm not a native English speaker at all. So learning English is something that I learned even more through reading than through speaking. I hardly ever get a chance to actually speak the language.
I was going to ask about that too. But first, tell me some of your favorite books. I'm just curious of which ones that you liked as a kid.
Well, as a kid, I read a lot of fantasy and horror. I was a big Stephen King fan. And I think his books are what made me want to be a writer as a teenager. But these days I mostly read thrillers and mysteries and nonfiction. I think my taste have changed as I got older. the book that I just finished yesterday is a book called A Kiss Before Dying by Ira Levin.
Okay.
Ira Levin wrote Rosemary's Baby, and A Kiss Before Dying is a tremendous book from the 1950s. I'm still awestruck by it, both as a reader and as a writer, just to see what a guy could do with a.
I interviewed someone on here whose parents were good friends with Ira Levin. That came up during So you just mentioned something that you said, right? You're not a native speaker. But you are fluent now. You're fantastic now. But I read that you, as a kid, you decided one day that you wanted to become fluent in English. That that was your goal. So why? What prompted that? Why? What made you decide that this is what you want to do?
I think that the goal eventually was to write. I don't remember the exact motivation. I think I was 13, the summer between my 7th and 8th grade, if I remember correctly. And I just decided that I was going to know this language thoroughly. And I picked up a book. I remember it was The Stand by Stephen King. My sister had a copy.
Did you start reading Stephen King in Hebrew or at first?
No, in English. It was in English.
Right.
So we learned English in school, of course. And apparently I'm pretty adept at picking up the language, as it turned out. But I didn't know the language thoroughly. I mean, as someone who I wouldn't have been able to write anything in it, convincingly, let's say. So I picked up that book and I read it with a dictionary at my elbow. And of course, back then the dictionary was a real dictionary, not on your phone or anything like that. And I remember I read about 30 pages each day over that summer, or over that summer and a bit more. And every time I stumbled upon a word that I didn't know, I would check in the dictionary, which was quite often in those days. And I kept up this habit to this day. I'm still doing it whenever and it's still happening from time to time. Not as often as it used to, but I still check words, just as a habit. And
I think it's fantastic.
Give me that skill to be able to write in English.
I did the same as a kid. I learned Spanish that way as a kid by reading comic books in Spanish.
Okay.
We were living in Mexico at the time, and so that's what I did. I started reading Spider-Man comic books and learning Spanish that way. So when did you first start writing? So you said you started doing this because you wanted to write. So you always had the desire to write?
I had it as a teenager, and I dabbled a bit. A lot of juvenile stuff, and I sort of put it aside when I joined the army, and later the real world in a way.
Right.
And only when I was in my mid-30s did I return to that youthful dream. When I learned about the Kindle, I read somewhere about the Kindle, and I read that people were not just reading about it, not just reading on that device, but there were authors who were just publishing their books mainly on Amazon,
right,
for other people to read on the Kindle. And I thought, okay, this seems like something that may be good for me. Maybe it seems like something that's fit my style of doing things. Because when you go with a book to a publisher, you first need to maybe get an agent and then go to a publisher. Right. It can take years actually to get published, and maybe you know about that better than I do. So it's a long process, and I wanted to. I didn't know if I was able to write a publishable book, a good book. Yeah. But I said, okay, if I will succeed in writing one, I want to get it out there. And I sort of believed that I would have enough judgment to say if it's worthwhile or not. So that's what I did.
I'm going to come back to you. I've been really trying seriously for I'd say right around now 17 years, and I'm on my third agent right now. So,
I see. I've never had one, so I don't know anything about that, relationship.
Well, so you wanted to write as a teen, and you didn't go back to it till your mid-30s or the 30s?
Yeah, I didn't touch it. I was just, living my life. Working and
what kind of things did you write back then?
What sort of? Sorry.
What kind of things did you write as a teen?
I wrote fantasy. The things that I would read. I tried writing a fantasy novel, and it's quite funny because I wrote one, a very bad one, and lost it. And years later, a friend of mine who knew from the army days, he said, I was cleaning up some stuff, and I found this manuscript. It brings out about 300 printed pages this is the book you said. You remember giving me to read it? The book you wrote when you were 18.
Right.
So it was there in a box at his house for about 20 years or so. And I actually scanned all the pages at one point with the software that sort of
Oh, that's cool. Yes.
deciphers images of text into words. And one page was missing, but I read the first few pages, and I was horrified. So it won't be coming out.
What made you go back after all the time? What prompted you to say, like, hey, I want to go back to this?
Just I think the desire was always there. It was dormant, but it was always in the background. Okay. And it's because I saw that people were making a go of it, and some of them were pretty successful. I thought, okay, let's give it a try now. Mm-hmm. I think that I'm ready. I'm more mature, and I think I'll be able to do it. Maybe. I didn't know. I was still living in the Netherlands at the time, and my first step was to join a writers group, which was mainly made up of American expats.
Is there a strong writing community where you live?
In Zichron Yaakov, I don't know. I'm not involved in a group these days. Not since I got back.
I'm sorry.
But back then, I was fortunate that they didn't ask me to submit a sample. They just allowed me to join, and I was the worst of the bunch by a substantial margin. I just didn't know anything. Didn't know how to write, and slowly but gradually, I sort of picked up on it, and now I'm 9 books later, and with the 10th on the way.
So you just strictly right now. There's no other career. This is it. Writing is.
Yeah, for the most part. I do some speaking,
right,
which revolves around the books or about Israeli history, because I write historical mysteries that are set in the early days of the State of Israel. So I'm sometimes hired to talk about that. For instance, just a few days ago, I was hired by the daughter of a longtime reader of mine to talk on his birthday. So they're Americans, and they hired me to speak on Zoom, in front of his family and friends and I picked a topic, an Israeli historical event that happened in Israel, which is in the background of one of my books, and I talked about that, and then we had a conversation. So I do that as well, but for the most part, that's what I do. I write the books and I promote them.
So I saw that you do a lot of speaking. So that's what you go mostly speak about, Israeli history?
Well, for the most part, I get invited because of the books.
Right.
And I'm not a historian, but I picked up a lot of information. I do a lot of research for the books.
Right.
So people ask me to speak about that, and it comes together. We speak about the history, how history influences the books, how do you get ideas from certain historical details that I find, and so it all comes together. And people who read historical fiction are usually interested in history as well, not just in the fiction part. So it sort of weaves together and becomes something quite special.
I am very much like you with that. I love historical fiction. I'm very into it. I taught history for a while. My dad was a history teacher. Right. Yeah, so it's ingrained. So were the Adam Lapid books the first books that you started writing, or you wrote something else first?
No, I started with the Adam Lapid books, and I have one non-Adam Lapid book out, one sort of modern thriller, but apart from that, my other 8 books are all Adam Lapid novels.
So tell me about the Adam Lapid book. So for whoever doesn't know, tell us about exactly what the premise is, because it's fascinating. When I was looking through them, I love the concept. But so tell me about the Adam Lapid books.
So Adam Lapid is a private detective who's living in Israel it begins in the late 1940s, and now it's in the early 1950s. Mm-hmm. And his background story is that he used to be a police detective on the Hungarian police force before the Second World War. Mm-hmm. Then when Germany invaded Hungary, he was sent with his family to Auschwitz. He was the only survivor, and he came to Israel all alone, traumatized, haunted by his memories and nightmares and his survivor's guilt. And now he's trying to rebuild his life in this new country. And he's solving mysteries along the way. That's his job. So in each book, he solves a mystery. Each book is a self-contained story. Mm-hmm. But of course, there's a certain development of his character and of the side characters that he spends a lot of time with. And everything is sort of has a rich historical background of the early years of the State of Israel. There is one book that's an exception, and that's book 6, which is a prequel that takes place in Auschwitz-Birkenau. It's called The Auschwitz Detective. And that's sort of the origin story of Adam Lapid, how he became the sort of person that readers get to know in the books that are set in Israel. So that's the one exception, but everything else is in Israel.
It's such a fascinating time period. I mean, just thinking about everything with that, you have, right, the creation of the State of Israel. You have a lot of Holocaust survivors coming into the area and natives of the region as well, creating and fortifying the state. So what was it about that time period, in particular, that appealed to you about this?
I have to admit that I don't exactly know what gave me the initial idea. I know what sort of led me to think about it. I was in that writers group in the Netherlands, and I was getting nowhere with my writing. And one of the other members, she told me, "You love Israel and you come from Israel, so why don't you write a book about that? Why don't you write a book set in Israel?" And I came home and I got the idea for the first Adam Lapid book out of the blue. So I did not know a lot about that time period, even though we learned about it a bit in school, but not to any great extent. So just the idea came to me of the first book, and the idea was that there was a German Jewish woman in 1939, still in Berlin, and she gives a baby boy to a friend who's immigrating to the land of Israel, who's fleeing Germany. And the mother gets stuck in Germany throughout the war, and she's only able to come to Israel in 1949. And in the interim, she has had no word of her son or of the woman who took him, and she hires Adam Lapid to find him. So that book is called 10 Years Gone, because the son has been gone for 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the premise. I had nothing else. I didn't know anything about Adam Lapid, nothing about his character. I just started writing and got going. So yeah.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you and I, we both love history. You said you love history. So I also, I'll come back to this in 1 second though too. Just curious right now, because I'm just fascinated by historical fiction. If you could just pick any time period to be in or live in or learn about, which would it be? I'm just curious.
Well, I would like to go back to those years. Now I'm sort of in love with the early years of the State of Israel, but beforehand, I would choose another time and place entirely. Maybe I'll go to the to Rome in the height of the Roman Empire. Even though life would be much less comfortable than it is today, we sort of get a romanticized view of how life was back then, but it was pretty harsh.
Yes,
I think we would find it very difficult to adapt to it.
Well, in particular for Jews, over an ancient.
Just this. The things that we take for granted are right. It's incredible. Just this chair that I'm sitting in, that's it's much more comfortable than the throne of the Roman emperor probably. So I'm not sure I would have been able to handle it. But that's an interesting time period. That's something that I'm fascinated by. I'm also fascinated by distant cultures like historical Japan and things in China. But the thing that I feel closest to now is that time period of the early years of the State of Israel. I would have liked to experience it for myself, also because my parents grew up there. In Tel Aviv.
Your parents, where'd they come from? So they were originally in Israel, or they came from another.
My mother was born in Tel Aviv, and my dad was born in the 1940s in South Africa, and his family came to Israel in 1949 when he was a kid, and they lived in Tel Aviv as well. So both of them grew up in the city, which is the main setting of the Adam Lapid novels. So I got to know a lot more about their childhood because I was writing the books. Because I keep asking them questions. What was on that street? Was this building still there? And they tell me that they remember very intricate details. I mean, this street wasn't paved in those years. That building wasn't there. There was an orange grove here.
Right.
And these are the games we played. This is the stuff we did. And so it enriched my understanding of their childhood and and my family history. Because I had to know that stuff to write the books, so I got a lot more curious than I was before. To my embarrassment, I admit.
Well, when they went through your books, did they say like, "Oh, this was great, this was good," or "This didn't happen like this"? Did they critique it like that?
I think I'm pretty accurate. But they just comment on the stories. The stories are the main things, and my dad can be pretty strict, but he said, no, this was a good book. This was great. This was better than the last one. So he doesn't give compliments without reason. But I think that, like myself, I think they're sort of surprised that I was able to do it. That I'm able to do this, because again, I mean, there's no reason why a person who has never lived in an English-speaking country, and I did not grow up speaking English at home. Right. Even though my dad was from South Africa, they did not speak English between themselves. That I'm able to do this. I'm still kind of shocked by it from time to time. So it's an unorthodox way of living. You know this as a writer yourself. People outside, let's say, the profession, sort of view it as something difficult, and of course, in a language that you don't speak natively, it's much harder.
So your parents are there for the creation of the state.
Well, they don't. My dad came a year later when the War of Independence was over, and my mother was. I mean, she was 4, so she doesn't remember. Those days. She doesn't remember it in any way. But they were there when Tel Aviv when Tel Aviv continued to grow. Tel Aviv grew a lot even in the 1920s and 30s. But they were there in the beginning, yeah. And it was a different country then.
Sure. I'm curious now also, as someone, who loves history, I've written historical things too, and it's like I always love doing the research part too. When you did the research as a lover of history, were there things that you found out while researching, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea about this?
Well, yeah, the things that influenced the stories, for instance, there were hardly any telephones in Israel in those years. I think I read a statistic somewhere that only 11% of the households in 1948 had telephones installed in them. And these were mostly people who needed telephones, doctors and officials and policemen, people like that. Otherwise, it was people who went out to call in the local drugstore. They had a phone with a meter on it, and you placed your telephone calls from a public phone in that way. So when Adam Lapid has to go and find someone, he can't call him on the phone usually. He needs to go and hope that you'll find him wherever he's supposed to be. And there were also very few cars. People did not have private cars. So he does a lot of walking and bus riding, which most detectives don't do in most mystery fiction. So it was a much less developed country and a much poorer country.
And your books were praised a lot, but I saw when we were corresponding, the Jewish Library of Congress, right? They gave
the Jewish Book Council, yeah.
Well, Jewish Book Council, right? So the Jewish Book Council, they praised the books a lot. So how's that to get that kind of acknowledgement? That I guess validation, I guess.
It's great, and I get it also from readers. So it's nice to get sort of what's called editorial reviews, like from the Jewish Book Council and the Jerusalem Post. But I mainly thrive on what readers tell me, and it's a great thrill to get an email from someone who tells me, I went on a trip to Tel Aviv and I walked around with the Adam Lapid books, searching for went to this location and that location, almost like they did it. That they went on a tour,
right?
And before the war, I was actually working on an Adam Lapid tour. A 10-day tour. So people, and because one of my readers suggested it, I said, okay, well, let's try and get a group together, and we'll do a sort of historically themed tour of Israel of the 1950s and 40s, and also part of it is the Adam Lapid novels. But that, of course, did not happen because of the war. But I believe one day it will, when things quiet down entirely.
Oh, that would be fantastic. So tell me about the newest one, your latest book that's coming out soon, but it'll be very close when the time this comes out. So it's In That Sleep Death. So tell me about that one.
Okay. So In That Sleep of Death is the one that is book 8, and it is set in 1952. And Adam Lapid, who is haunted by nightmares because of his experiences in the Holocaust, in the beginning of the book, he walks around at night in the deserted streets of Tel Aviv in the middle of the night in winter because he can't sleep and he needs to get out of his room, and he sees someone sleepwalking on the street. He sort of encounters this strange man, and he sort of plods along, completely oblivious to his surroundings, and he's walking around in army boots. And Adam Lapid spots him on a few nights, and he sort of gets curious about him. He's a person sort of like me. He's also driven from his bed to walk the empty streets at night. And one day he stumbles upon his dead body. He's been murdered. So he gets sort of sucked into that case of trying to figure out what happened to this solitary walker, which sort of mirrors his own experiences in a way. And the story sort of came along because it is partly inspired by a real crime that happened in Tel Aviv, not in Tel Aviv, but in the land of Israel in the 1930s. I won't say more about it because then it will be giving the story away completely. But that was sort of one part of the initial idea, and another part was a certain thing that happened in a certain concentration camp during World War II, which again I can't go into because it will give another part of the story away. But these two sort of historical facts collided in my mind and created the story, the initial idea of the story. And this is the way it happens sometimes. Sometimes the historical research sort of brings up a new idea for a new book.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we cover you have one other book that's not in the Adam Lapid series. What's that one?
It's called The Payback Girl, and it's a modern thriller set in the United States, mostly in Boston. And it's a revenge thriller, so it's something completely different from the Adam Lapid books. The Adam Lapid books are written for instance, in first person from the viewpoint of Adam Lapid, so they're a lot more personal. The Payback Girl is told in the third person from the viewpoints of several characters, and it's a revenge thriller. So it's pretty heavy on action. It's not a mystery novel because there's no mystery to solve, but it's quite thrilling, and people like it. Yeah, people seem to enjoy it, even though it's a different animal altogether.
Did I see that you had a 9th Adam Lapid book already done, or did I see that, or no?
No, I'm writing it these days. I think I'm about 60% or maybe 70% of the way through. And it will also be a European novel. It's set in a displaced persons camp in Europe soon after World War II, when Holocaust survivors, they were gathered into these, what was called DP camps, or displaced persons camp, under the supervision of the American Army or the British Army, depending on where they ended up in. So it's sort of a way to, again, examine tell part of Adam Lapid's history, and also shed a light on a historical time that most Jews hardly ever think about, even though many of them have grandparents who were in displaced persons camps.
So you're not part of any. I'm just go back. So right now, there's no, you're not part of any writing group or anything. There's no writing things around you right now.
No, of course I connect with writers through the internet, but I don't belong to a writers group as I did in those days. I don't show my writing until it's done to anyone. I just don't feel like it's not part of my process.
No, I used to be in critique group. I no longer am. I kind of feel like the same right now, that I'd rather just write instead of.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. I think it was appropriate when I was beginning, but now I don't think it suits me. Even though other writers, successful writers, have critique groups even long into their careers, and they speak highly of them. But for me, I don't feel that it would.
And I saw that you get invited. You get invited a lot to go to schools and everything to talk writing with students.
No, because my books are not available in Hebrew.
Oh, so, really? Okay.
They're barely read in Israel.
That's amazing.
I have family members who've told me, we want to read the books.
I think you're missing out. Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, we don't read in English for fun. We know English. We can read in English.
Right.
But it won't be enjoyable to us. So get the books translated, and then we'll read them.
I'll have to agree. I have to agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not insulted in any way. So,
No, so what are you working on next?
I'm gonna finish this book, the ninth Adam Lapid book. I hope pretty soon, and then it's either another Adam Lapid book set in Europe or an Adam Lapid book set in Israel, or a Holocaust novel, which I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure exactly which one.
You don't have to give details.
No, I don't know the details.
Okay.
Yet at all. I don't have. I usually have one or two ideas at a time. That's it. I don't have.
I'm like that. I write down a million ideas at the same time, and then which one? Where do I pursue next? Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So make sure, like, okay, how can people follow you on social media?
So I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Jonathan /Jonathan Dunsky books, and I'm also on Threads and Instagram. Just search for my name, Jonathan Dunsky. And I also sell my books and related merch on my website, jonathandunsky.com. So you can find the audiobooks are there. They're not available on Audible for reasons that we won't get into, but people who want the audiobooks can find them on my website.
Fantastic. Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I enjoyed the concept of the book so much. Now I have to go read them, but I have to. But I love the concept of this. I think it's a fascinating concept, and I love that period of history.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. It was great speaking with you.
Well, again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and again, a very special thanks to Jonathan Dunsky. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.